I thought I was walking into a simple Sunday dinner at my mother-in-law's house. I had no idea I was walking into the opening move of a 5-year war. A war she had been quietly planning since the day Daniel first brought me home, and she looked me over like something unpleasant she'd discovered on the bottom of her shoe. She said it to his aunt that night, not to my face. She was never that honest to my face, not then. She said it in the kitchen while I was in the hallway taking off my coat, and her voice carried just enough for me to hear every syllable. "We don't need grandkids from a peasant." The aunt laughed, a small, polished laugh, like the clink of expensive crystal. Daniel was in the living room pouring drinks, completely unaware. Or perhaps not completely unaware. That question would haunt me for years. I stood in that hallway for exactly 3 seconds, my coat half on and half off, the cold air from the front door still on my shoulders. I told myself I had misheard. That's what you tell yourself when the truth is too ugly to look at directly. You fold it up, tuck it somewhere behind your ribs, and you walk into the living room with a smile on your face and wine in your hand, and you toast to family, and you eat the overcooked lamb, and you compliment the centerpiece. You do all of this because you are 26 years old and desperately in love, and you believe, with the full, embarrassing faith of someone who has never been truly betrayed, that love is enough to smooth over the rough edges of other people's contempt. I was wrong, but I wouldn't know exactly how wrong for another 5 years. My name is Clara. I grew up in a small town 3 hours outside the city, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where the high school football team is a civic religion, and the diner on Main Street has had the same menu since 1987. My parents were not wealthy. My father drove a delivery truck for 22 years. My mother worked part-time at the school library and kept an immaculate vegetable garden in the backyard. We were not poor, but we were not the kind of people who summered anywhere or referred to money as capital. We were the kind of people who paid their bills on time and fixed things when they broke, and were grateful for what they had. I left that small town at 18 with a scholarship to study accounting, worked 2 jobs through university, graduated near the top of my class, and by the time I met Daniel at 24, I had a solid entry-level position at a mid-sized financial services firm and a small but respectable savings account that I had built entirely on my own. I was proud of that. Not loudly proud, I didn't talk about it much, but privately, in the way that only people who have worked hard for something ordinary understand. I was deeply proud of the life I was assembling for myself, piece by careful piece. Daniel was different from anyone I had dated before. He was warm and funny and had an easy confidence that didn't tip into arrogance, or so I thought. He worked in commercial real estate, came from money in the way that people who come from money rarely fully acknowledge, and he had the particular kind of charm that made you feel, when he was focused on you, like you were the only person in the room. I fell for him quickly and completely. We moved in together after 8 months. We got engaged after 2 years. We married quietly in a small ceremony because his mother, Eleanor, had made it clear that any wedding she was involved in planning would spiral into a social event for her benefit, and neither Daniel nor I wanted that. Eleanor. Where do I begin with Eleanor? She was 63 when Daniel and I married. Elegant in the way that certain women of a certain generation are elegant. Not warm, not approachable, but precise. She wore her silver hair in a smooth chignon that never seemed to shift. Her clothes were always pressed, always coordinated, always in the muted palette of someone who had learned long ago that true wealth announced itself quietly. She smelled of a particular French perfume, something with bergamot and white musk, and whenever she entered a room, she had a way of taking a very brief, very subtle inventory of everyone in it, like a general assessing terrain. She had never, in the 4 years Daniel and I dated before marriage, been overtly cruel to me. That's important to understand. She had never raised her voice or made a direct insult in front of witnesses. What she did was something more sophisticated and far more difficult to name. She had a way of asking questions that weren't really questions. Clara, I imagine your family must find all this quite overwhelming. The city, I mean. I do think it's admirable how you've managed to save money on your salary. The compliment wrapped around the diminishment, so tightly you couldn't separate them without looking petty. She was masterful at it. And for years, I absorbed it, smiled through it, told myself I was being too sensitive, that this was just how she was, that Daniel loved me, and that was what mattered. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't discover until much later, was that Eleanor had never once stopped believing that Daniel had made a mistake. That her son, her only son, who had been raised in a 4-bedroom house in the right neighborhood and sent to the right schools and introduced to the right families, had somehow stumbled into a relationship with someone beneath him and been too besotted to find his way back out. She hadn't stopped believing it. She had simply been patient. The first year of our marriage was, despite everything, genuinely happy. We bought a small house, nothing grand, a 3-bedroom on a quiet street with a garden that needed work and a kitchen that needed updating, but it was ours and we loved it. We split the down payment, but the bulk of it came from my savings. I had been more careful with money than Daniel ever had. He was generous and a little careless with it in the way people are when they have always had enough. And so when we sat down with the mortgage broker, it was my credit history and my savings account that made the numbers work. The house was in both our names. That felt right. That felt like partnership. Eleanor came to see the house for the first time 3 weeks after we moved in, on a Saturday in October. I remember the smell of fallen leaves on the street outside, that particular autumnal smell of cold earth and damp wood. I had baked something, a lemon cake, I think, because I knew she liked lemon, and the house was clean and warm and smelled of vanilla and citrus. I wanted her to see it at its best. I wanted, even then, even after years of quiet condescension, for her to approve. She walked through it the way she walked through everything, deliberately, unhurried, assessing. She complimented the garden's potential. She noted that the kitchen was cozy, which was not a compliment from Eleanor. She picked up a small ceramic dish I'd placed on the kitchen windowsill, a piece I'd bought at a craft fair from a local artist, handmade and uneven and completely charming, and turned it over, looked at the bottom, and set it back down without comment. I watched her do this and felt something tighten in my chest. She had her perfume on, the bergamot and white musk. I would come to associate that smell with a low, humming anxiety for the rest of my marriage. "You've done nicely with what you have," she said finally, standing in the living room with her handbag on her arm. "It's very sensible." Daniel beamed. He thought that was a compliment. I knew better by then. But I said thank you, and I cut the lemon cake, and we had tea, and she left at 4 o'clock sharp, and I washed the dishes and told myself, this is fine. This is manageable. I can live with this. I could not, as it turned out, live with what was coming. But that October afternoon in the kitchen, with the lemon cake and the smell of her perfume and the ceramic dish, that was the last time things were merely uncomfortable. The last time before they became something else entirely. The first real warning sign came 14 months into our marriage, in the form of a question so seemingly innocent that I replayed it for weeks afterward, trying to understand why it had unsettled me. We were at Eleanor's for Sunday lunch, a ritual she had instituted shortly after our wedding, framed as a gift. I want us to stay close as a family, but experienced, by me at least, as an obligation that arrived every 7 days with the reliability of a bill. The food was always good. Eleanor was an accomplished cook, one of the few things I genuinely admired about her. And the table was always properly set, with linen napkins and the good china that had belonged to Daniel's grandmother. That china was something Eleanor mentioned occasionally, in passing, with a specific kind of casualness that I would later understand was not casual at all. On this particular Sunday, we were halfway through a roast chicken when Eleanor set down her fork with a small, precise click and looked at me. Not at Daniel, at me. "Clara," she said, and her voice had that tone it sometimes had, warm on the surface, with something harder underneath, like a hand in a velvet glove. "I've been meaning to ask, how is everything going at the firm? I imagine with the new quarter starting, it must be quite demanding. I told her it was going well. I had recently been assigned to a larger client portfolio, not quite a promotion yet, but a clear indication that one was coming. And I said something careful and modest about that. And your salary, does it adjust with the new responsibilities, or do you have to wait for a formal review cycle? She said it conversationally, pleasantly, as if she were asking about the weather while reaching for the bread basket. Something cold moved through me. The question was too specific. It wasn't the question of someone making polite conversation. It had the texture of someone gathering data. But Daniel answered before I could, saying something breezy about how these things always took time, and the moment passed, and Eleanor turned the conversation to a neighbor's renovation, and the discussion moved on. But I thought about it later. In bed that night, with Daniel sleeping beside me, and the house quiet around us, and only the distant sound of a car passing on the street, I lay in the dark and turned the question over in my mind. How is your salary adjusting? Why would she ask that? Why would my mother-in-law want to know the specific mechanics of my compensation? Daniel earned well, not extravagantly, but comfortably. We were not struggling. There was no reason, no practical reason, for Eleanor to be curious about the precise structure of my income. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was good at telling myself that. It was, in retrospect, one of the most useful skills Eleanor had cultivated in me over the years, the habit of second-guessing my own instincts, of labeling my unease as oversensitivity, of smoothing over the things that didn't quite fit with the narrative of a normal, loving, slightly difficult extended family. I had been trained, slowly and thoroughly, to distrust my own perception. The questions continued, spaced out carefully over the following months so that no single one felt alarming. How was the mortgage rate? Had we considered refinancing? Did my firm offer equity participation? Had we thought about making a will? She asked Daniel these things too, sometimes, but always in a way that circled back to me, my salary, my savings, my name on our mortgage. Daniel never seemed to notice the pattern. He would answer her questions openly, with the trusting ease of a man who had never had reason to distrust his own mother. And I would sit across the table and watch him give her information I had never authorized him to share. And I would feel that cold thing move through me again and again, and I would say nothing, and I would hate myself a little for saying nothing. The second warning sign was harder to dismiss. It was a Tuesday evening in late spring, about 18 months into our marriage. I came home from work later than usual. A client meeting had run long, and as I came through the front door, I heard Daniel's voice from the kitchen. He was on the phone. His voice was low, not whispering exactly, but deliberately quiet in the way people are when they don't want to be overheard, which is different from the ordinary volume of a private call. I set my bag down in the hallway as quietly as I could. I don't know why I did that. Some instinct. The house had a way of carrying sound, and from the hallway I could hear him clearly. I know, but now isn't the right time. A pause. Because she'd ask questions, Mum. She notices things. Another pause, longer. I'm not saying that. I'm saying we need to be careful about the timing. His voice dropped further, and I lost the next few sentences. Then clearly, look, just let me handle it. Give me a few more months. I stood in the hallway with my coat still on and my keys in my hand, and the world felt slightly wrong, the way it feels when you step off a boat onto solid land and the ground still seems to move beneath you. He was talking to his mother. About me. She notices things. About timing, about something that required care and caution and months of patience to execute. I walked into the kitchen and he startled, genuinely startled. His body gave a small jerk and he turned to look at me with something that was not quite guilt and not quite fear, but was somewhere between the two. And then he smoothed it over so quickly that if I had blinked, I would have missed it. "Hey," he said and smiled. "Didn't hear you come in. I'm just finishing up with Mum." He He said a few bland closing words into the phone and hung up. "Everything okay?" I asked. I was watching his face carefully. I had learned to watch his face. "Yeah, she just called to chat. You know how she is." He turned to stir something on the stove, his back to me, his shoulders slightly too set, too deliberate in their casualness. "I know how she is," I said quietly. He didn't answer. The spoon moved in the pot. The kitchen smelled of garlic and olive oil. The clock on the wall ticked. I changed out of my work clothes and set the table, and we ate dinner and talked about other things. And I did not ask him what he was handling, or what required careful timing, or what it was about me that he had found it necessary to warn his mother about. I did not ask because I was afraid of the answer. And in not asking, in not pushing, in not forcing the thing into the light, I gave it the darkness it needed to grow. That is the thing no one tells you about the slow disasters. They don't announce themselves. They grow in the silences you create by being too afraid to speak. The formal review cycle came 6 weeks later, and with it, a promotion that I had worked toward for 3 years. Senior associate, with a corresponding salary increase that was, by the standards of my firm, significant. My manager called me into his office on a Thursday afternoon and slid a folder across the desk. And I sat across from him and read the number and felt something warm and fierce and private move through my chest. The particular joy of a person who has built something real with their own hands. I called my mother on the way home. She cried a little, which made me cry a little, and she said she was proud of me and that my father would be proud of me. And I drove the rest of the way home with the windows down and the early summer air on my face and thought, this is mine. Whatever else is complicated or uncertain or quietly wrong, this is mine, and no one can take it from me. I should have known. I should have remembered Eleanor's questions about the precise mechanics of my compensation. I should have connected the dots I had been careful not to connect. But I was happy that evening, genuinely and fully happy for the first time in months. And happiness makes you careless. I told Daniel that night. He was delighted, or performed delight so convincingly that I could not tell the difference. We opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving. We ordered takeout and ate it on the couch. He kissed me and said he was proud of me, and I leaned against him and believed it completely. He called his mother the next morning. I was in the shower, but I know he did, because she called me on my cell phone at 9:15, right after I'd dressed, while Daniel was still at the table drinking coffee. Her voice was warm and bright and perfectly calibrated to sound like genuine delight. "Daniel told me the wonderful news. Senior associate. Clara, that's just marvelous. You've worked so hard." A beat. "And quite a substantial increase, I imagine," she said, and the warmth in her voice didn't waver at all. And I stood in the bedroom with the phone against my ear and my new blazer half buttoned, and I said yes, it was a good increase. And I smiled and thanked her and hung up. And I stood there for a long moment in the morning light and thought, she already knew. Daniel told her before I was even out of the shower, and she'd called to confirm the number. The document that changed everything was not hidden. That is what I found most devastating afterward. Not that he had been cunning enough to conceal it perfectly, but that he had felt so safe, so certain of my obliviousness, that he had left it sitting in a manila folder in the second drawer of his home office desk, beneath a copy of a lease renewal and 2 months of bank statements. He had felt safe. He had looked at me for 2 years of marriage and concluded that I was not a threat, that I would not look. I looked because I was not looking for anything. It was a Thursday evening in November. Daniel was away, a 2-day conference, he had said. I needed a pen. I went to his desk. I opened the second drawer. The folder was labeled, in Eleanor's handwriting, precise, slanted cursive, with a single word, estate. I opened it the way you lift a rock in a garden, not expecting anything alarming, just curious. There were 4 documents inside. The first was a letter on Eleanor's personal stationery, addressed to a solicitor I didn't recognize, describing our house, my house, the one I had saved 6 years to afford, as a family asset and referencing an informal agreement that had allegedly been discussed with and consented to by both parties to the marriage. The second was a financial summary. It listed the property's market value and a proposed division of sale proceeds. Daniel's name appeared. Eleanor's name appeared. My name appeared, in a smaller allocation, accompanied by a note. Original contribution settled. As if my down payment, my 6 years of careful saving, had been tidied away into a footnote. The third document stopped my breathing entirely. It was a signature page. Daniel's line was signed. Eleanor's line was signed. And my line, my name, printed beneath a blank, had a signature on it that I had not written. Someone had studied my handwriting and practiced it carefully. But the loop on the C was wrong. The way the A fell at the end was wrong. I had signed my name thousands of times, and I knew the precise grammar of my own hand, and this was not it. The fourth document was a transfer authorization, dated 6 weeks earlier. I sat down on the floor of that office with the folder in my lap, not dramatically, not with a cry, but the way a building settles when its foundation shifts. The carpet was mid-gray and slightly rough under my palms. The room smelled of Daniel's wood soap and morning coffee. The clock read 8:42. I remember every detail with the absolute clarity of a person whose world has just been quietly, thoroughly dismantled. My hands were not shaking. I had expected them to shake. Instead, they were very still and very cold, and when I stood and placed the documents back exactly as I had found them and closed the drawer, I felt something settle in my chest. Not calm, but something harder, something purposeful, something that said, "Not like this, not without a fight." I called my father first. I told him almost nothing on the phone, just that I needed him the next day, and he said he would be there by noon. Then I called Rachel, a paralegal at a property law firm, which is exactly why I called her. She didn't panic. She asked 3 precise questions and said, "Don't touch anything, take photographs in natural light tomorrow morning, and send them to me before you do anything else." I did. She put me in contact with Ms. Hartley, a solicitor who looked at my photographs and my mortgage documents, and said, with a calm that I found deeply steadying, "The forged signature is a criminal matter. Keep everything. Move nothing. Confront no one until we know exactly what we're dealing with." I left her office with a plan. Daniel came home Friday evening and kissed me at the door and asked how my week had been, and I told him it had been quiet. I watched his face. He gave nothing away. He had been practicing, after all, for at least 2 years. The confrontation came Saturday morning, uninvited. Eleanor called at 9 and said she was stopping by at 11, and I spent the 2 hours in between sitting very still, making coffee, and preparing myself. I heard the precise click of her heels on the front path. I heard Daniel come downstairs. She came in carrying pastries from her favorite bakery, set them on the counter with a smile, and began talking about formalizing arrangements to protect everyone. And it was a perfectly rehearsed performance. And Daniel nodded at the table and did not look at me, and I let her finish. Then I said, "Like the arrangements in the document in the second drawer of Daniel's desk?" The silence was total. Eleanor's hands went still. Daniel's face moved through confusion, recognition, and then something that looked very much like fear. "I don't know what you mean," Eleanor said. She recovered fast. She was very good. "I think you do," I said. "The letter to the solicitor, the financial summary, the transfer authorization, and the signature with my name on it, but not my handwriting." "Clara," Daniel said. "Don't," I said. It came out quietly, not loudly, not in the cracked way of someone losing control, but low and final and very clear. I looked at Eleanor. "Did you sign my name?" She said nothing. She looked at Daniel. He was looking at the table. "I want you to leave," I said to her. "Leave this house." The next conversation we have will be with our lawyers present. She stood. She gathered her bag with absolute composure. She looked at Daniel. He did not turn toward her. And she walked out, and I heard the front door, the heels on the path, the car, and then silence. Daniel walked to the window. When he turned, his face was collapsed, like something hollowed from within. "I didn't forge the signature," he said. "I want you to know that. But I knew about the plan, Clara. I've known for over a year. I thought I could slow it down without telling me," I said. He didn't deny it. "You let her ask me about my salary. You told her about my promotion before I was out of the shower. You said, 'Give me a few more months.' You were managing me, Daniel." His silence was the most honest answer he had given in 2 years. Ms. Hartley moved quickly. The forged signature was documented and formally reported. Eleanor's solicitor received a legal letter within 10 days. The transfer authorization was voided. The legal claim on the property was not only baseless — my documented down payment constituted the larger share of the original equity — but the forgery made Eleanor's position so precarious that her own solicitor advised her to withdraw all claims entirely. She did. The additional twist arrived from Rachel, who had been quietly digging. She discovered that Eleanor had approached our mortgage broker the previous spring, representing herself as holding power of attorney for Daniel, which she did not have, in a conversation about refinancing options. The broker had asked for documentation, and the approach had ended there. But it had happened. Eleanor had been working multiple angles, testing multiple entry points, for longer than I had known. When I told Daniel about this, he sat very still and then said, "She told me she was just asking questions." I believed that he believed it. That was the real tragedy of him. Not malice, but a particular kind of love for his mother, so complete and so uncritical that he had let her shape his reality without ever looking clearly at what she was shaping. He had not been her accomplice so much as her instrument. That distinction mattered. It was not enough to save the marriage, but it mattered. We separated in February, not with screaming, with grief, which is in some ways worse than anger because it doesn't feel like something you can fight. We sat in the kitchen, and I told him I couldn't stay, and he didn't argue. He helped me make a list of what was mine and what was his. I kept the house. He moved into a flat across the city. We divided everything with a thoroughness and a politeness that was its own kind of sorrow. Eleanor did not contact me after the legal matter resolved. She had lost more than the property claim. She had lost her son's unquestioning allegiance. Daniel told me, in one of our last conversations before the divorce was finalized, that he had confronted her about the mortgage broker visit, that she had told him it was all for the family, that he had looked at her and said, quietly and completely, "She was family. You just never chose to see it." It has been 2 years since that November evening. The living room is warm white now. We repainted it, my father and I, the weekend after Daniel moved out, standing on the drop cloth with rollers and a bottle of wine, saying almost nothing, which was more than enough. The garden is better than it was. I grew tomatoes and basil last summer, and something that was supposed to be courgette but produced only leaves, which made me laugh. The ceramic dish from the craft fair is still on the kitchen windowsill. Eleanor once turned it over in her hands and set it back down without comment. I think about that sometimes, what she was assessing, what she concluded. She called me a peasant. She said it in her kitchen, with her good china and her French perfume and her absolute certainty that people like me exist to be arranged around other people's lives like furniture. She was wrong. I was not furniture. I was the foundation. And when I refused to hold the weight of her plans, her structure fell, not mine. I poured wine on the back porch last September with Rachel, in the warm evening air that smelled of turned earth and late-season grass, and she asked me how I was, and I thought about it properly before answering. "I'm good," I said, and I meant it the only way it's ever worth meaning, not with the easy confidence of someone who has never been tested, but with the quieter and more permanent confidence of someone who has been tested and has not broken. You keep going. You take back what's yours. And then you grow things.